In lesson 9.1, we're going to talk about square roots. And we're going to use square roots to solve equations. So if you remember that a square root always has two answers. It has a positive answer and a negative answer. So when we're using square roots to solve equations, you have to be sure that you give two answers. And I'm going to show you, it's a little shortcut that we're going to put in front of our numbers. So if you remember square roots, square root means what number times itself gives me 25. So the square root of 25 would be 5 because 5 times 5 is 25. However, negative 5 times negative 5 also gives me 25. So the square root of 25 is positive 5 and negative 5. But rather than writing them out twice, we're going to just write our answer as plus or minus 5. Okay, now the only time we don't do that is if there's already a plus or a minus sign in front of your radical, like in the second one here. This means just give the positive square root of 81, which would be positive 9. Now to square root a fraction, you're going to square root them as two separate things. You'll do the square root of the top number over the square root of the bottom number. Now, I don't have to write the plus or minus twice, because that's just too much work. So it's the square root of this whole fraction. So it's going to be plus or minus, and the square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of 9 is 3. So it'll be plus or minus 2/3. And in the last one, there's already a minus out in front, so they just want the negative square root of 196, so I would just say negative 14. All right, so now here's something that we're going to use coming up later in this chapter. This is part of the quadratic formula. So we're going to use this to help solve more complicated equations. But for right now, we're just going to look at this portion of the formula, and we're going to plug in our numbers. And then we're going to work it out. So, b squared, b is negative 10. So remember to put negative numbers in parentheses. So negative 10 squared minus 4 times a is 2 times c is 8. Notice at this point there are no letters underneath my square root. So now I just do order of operations. I do the exponents first. So negative 10 to the second power is 100. Minus, now I do 4 times 2 times 8. 4 times 2 is 8. And 8 times 8 is 64. You have to multiply before you can subtract. Okay, it's order of operations. So you have to multiply before you subtract. Now I can subtract. 100 minus 64 is 36. And the square root of 36 is plus or minus 6. Okay, so that's just square roots. So now we're going to use square roots to help us solve equations. So pause the video if you need to before moving on to the next part. And now let's take a look at some equations. We're going to start off a little simple and we're going to work our way up. So the first thing you want to do is you want to get the squared term all by itself. Okay? Do not touch any numbers that are inside parentheses. That's going to be the very last thing you do. So in the first example here, it's just x squared. So the x squared is all by itself. To undo a square, okay, power of 2 is the square, the opposite of square is square root. So you're going to square root one side, square root the other side. Whatever you do to one side, you do to the other side. Square root of x squared, the square and the square root cancel each other out, so I get x equals, and the square root of 169 is plus or minus 13. Now, if this was x squared equals negative 169, if your x squared term equals a negative number, you have to stop and say no solution. Because you can't square root a negative number, that's something called imaginary numbers, and that's going to happen later in Algebra 2. So don't worry about that right now. If it equals a negative number, just stop. Let's try the next one. My x squared is not by itself. It's being multiplied by 121. So first, I'm going to divide both sides by 121. I get x squared equals, if I could reduce this fraction, I would, but I can't. So I'm just going to leave it as 49 over 121. And this is helpful because now to get rid of the squared term, you're going to square root both sides. Square and the square root cancel. And remember, to square root fractions, you square root the top number and square root the bottom number. So the square root of 49 is 7, and the square root of 121 is 11. If you go to square root and your numbers are not perfect squares, see if you can reduce your fraction first, and that might help. And the next one, now I've got parentheses, so it's going to get a little more involved. But the parentheses are what's being squared. So I want to get the squared term all by itself, which means I need to get the parentheses by itself. So I'm going to move that minus 9 by adding 9. X minus 5, keep the parentheses, squared, equals 7 plus 9 is 16. Now remember from chapter 8, I'm not allowed to distribute this exponent because it has subtraction in the parentheses. So what I need to do is get rid of the square, the little 2. So to undo the square, you square root both sides. The square and the square root cancel, so I'm left with x minus 5 equals, square root of 16 is plus or minus 4. Now at this point, and this is the only time this happens, you have to set up two equations. X minus 5 equals positive 4, and x minus 5 equals negative 4, because you're going to get two very different answers. Solve each one just like normal, so add 5. X equals 9, that's one answer. Add 5, and x equals 1, that's the other answer. This only happens when you have parentheses being squared. You have to do two separate equations. Now let's try the last one. I want to get that x squared all by itself, so first I'm going to move that 30. And I get 7x squared equals negative 21. I'm going to divide by 7, and I get x squared equals negative 3. At this point, my squared term equals a negative number, so I stop and I say no solution. Okay, because I can't square root a negative number. And that's solving equations using square roots. So pause that video, fill in all those examples, and then try some of the problems.